Good evening, friends and family, and thank you for coming to another night with Repair, Restore, and Grow Black Communities weekly podcast behind Black business. And tonight we have Dr. Larry Muhammad, who is the founder of Genius Education and Innovation Center, which is an independent school here in Chicago, located at 619 East 67th Street. And Dr. Muhammad, I want to thank you so much for coming with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Good to be back.
Absolutely. It was important to have this conversation um, because of what's going on here in Chicago with our youth. And not only
Right.
with our youth, but with our leadership, with our politicians, with our people in our communities in general. While we have a lot of people that are doing some wonderful work in our community that are being successful, we
Mhm.
do have some problems across the board that need to be addressed. And we feel that a lot of these problems evolve around education. And that is why
Yes.
I asked Dr. Larry to come. I'm going to make a few announcements here at the beginning, and then I'm going to let Dr. Larry talk because he does have a short time with us tonight. But I do want to thank you for taking out the time, really. So,
No problem. Thank you for having me.
absolutely. So, as you know, we're a nonprofit organization and we support our businesses in Chicago. We want to increase the awareness and support of businesses here in Chicago. And in order for our businesses to thrive, we have to support them. We have to do business with Black people. And the fact that we even have to have this conversation, the fact that we even have to have this kind of effort speaks to, speaks volumes to a problem with this. And so that's why we started Repair, Restore, and Grow Black Communities. Um, when we look at our youth today, and many of our people, as I mentioned earlier, there's some components that are involved in doing what we're saying that we should be doing as a people and supporting each other. And one of those problems is education and the whole issue around culture. You know, when we look at when we talk about culture, we're talking about a way of life. And so other people, when they have a culture, we talk about a language, we talk about different components of that culture, which I would like to get into. And ours seems to be broken because it's immersed in with America, and everybody can kind of come by and take what they want of our culture. It's hard to make it distinct to our people, and so we're fragmented there. And your education is a part of your culture. And so, Dr. Larry, I would like for you to give us your definition of education.
Thank you. That's a really important question because I don't think we really reflect on that much. And the first thing that comes to mind, of course, is the message to the black man, where the Honorable Elijah Muhammad um, talked about and defined education. And the in the simplest terms, the simplest explanation, education is supposed to give us the foundation and the tools for civilization.
Mhm.
You know, um, and of course, in this modern era and world we live in, we don't hear much about that word. That word is not used much either. Civilization, for obvious reasons. Um, but education gives us the tools, or supposed to give us the tools um, for building civilization. And obviously, knowledge is a key factor in that. But what you do with the knowledge um, is even more important.
Absolutely.
When we get into the definition, I think most of the time everyone sees education, schools, schooling, all of that as one thing. Um, but of course, schooling is an aspect of education, and I think that's another place where we go wrong in this society, where we start to treat school different. We start to. I was thinking about uh, Singapore, which we can get to and talk about a little later,
Mhm.
and how they handle education, and some other societies in the world currently, um, and they just handle it altogether different, and they see it different from the way that we have been orientated in this society, in this country. So yeah, so that's the summary for me. Education gives you the foundation to create a better and more functional civilization, more successful and prosperous civilization, and gives you the tools you need to do that, which we can get more into tonight.
Absolutely. It you know
Yeah.
when students go to school, uh, how often do you hear someone talk about why we're here, why we're learning what we're learning, and what is the responsibility that we have to take what we learn and give back. And in the Black community, I feel like it gets fragmented because we're getting educated to do what?
Mm-hmm.
And when I see the lawlessness, the violence, the behavior, the disregard, and I look back at earlier definition that I saw of education, where when you look at it at its most primitive level, it's about developing culture,
Yeah.
preparing you to be a part of a smaller community, and develop it into adulthood, and you have a responsibility. I think that issue or concept of responsibility is not driven. I'm going to get an education so I can get me a good job.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get me an education so I can buy me a car, so I can buy me a house, so I can get out of this, so I can get out of this condition that I'm
Right.
in, not be a part of, you know. And it goes back to, I don't know if I've spoken on to you about this, about the young man that I spoke with at CVS High School, who had never been downtown Chicago, and
Mm-hmm.
his perspective on that was everyone was so happy down there. So
Mm-hmm.
in downtown, everybody's happy. In his community, everybody's mad, down, depressed, what have you, because of
Right.
what's going on and because of the lack of resources. Um, and no matter how much we push forward, there doesn't seem to be a will um, with the community at large in this country to give Black people an opportunity to develop and evolve and create community.
Mm-hmm.
It's constantly, when we do, it's constantly attacked,
Yeah.
like
Right.
Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so what I wanted to talk about is why we need our own schools
Right.
so that we can begin to address these issues.
Yes.
And that's why I asked you to come on tonight. We need to be developing our own schools and
Yes.
educating our children so that they can have a sense of community, so they can have a sense of a culture that is not
Mhm.
fragmented into the mainstream for everybody to just come by and take the music and the art and all the contributions that we have made.
Right.
And so that is why I was asking you to come on tonight.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you invited me on to discuss that because yesterday, um, I had the opportunity to visit and talk with Dr. Iva Carruthers, um, who is, one of our well-known educators and Black nationalists who created and runs the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Conference. And, my most of my career, as you know, has been involved in independent Black education. And so I started my career and most recently, in terms of having a position in a school, um, my career was with Muhammad University of Islam, which is the Nation of Islam's school. So MUI was established. I was a teacher in the 90s and the elementary department head, but most recently from 2008 through 2014-15, I was the national director of the school. And we have a few other schools around the country. At one time, we had 100 schools when the Honorable Elijah Muhammad um, was here and the nation was at its peak. There were close to 100 schools around the world, um, throughout the country, the Caribbean, Belize. Uh, and so independent education, especially in the Black community, um, when we talk about independent schools, much of that history goes back to institutions like MUI. And so today we have gotten far away from that. When we think about Booker T. Washington and what he did and how he fought to establish Tuskegee, and first how he fought to get educated, being born into slavery, and when he was around um, I guess about maybe 12 or 13, the slaves were emancipated. So he was around this era of transitioning from slavery to freedom, and the thirst for education of Black people at that time was so great that obviously we know that they were educating themselves. They were taking time, but reading his history and how the elders in the community around the plantation after slavery was after emancipation, and they started to set up, you know, um, their community and started to learn how to interact and survive and thrive after slavery. Education was a priority, and so he was able to find someone who could help him to read and educate himself to the point where he became a teacher of the smaller and younger children in that community in Virginia. And then eventually they put their nickels and dimes together, and he found his way and he started heading on foot and horse and wagon and however he could get there, heading to um, Hampton, because he wanted to attend the Hampton boarding school, which was the only school at that time where blacks could attend. And so, understanding that history, which can be read in the book Up from Slavery, has to be a requirement
Mhm.
for our people and a requirement for especially our children, and start to focus back in on the need for independent education, because we always, as you know, we always find ourselves coming back to this question about independent education. And we constantly find ourselves fighting um, the public school system, even when that public school system is ran by Black people.
Mhm.
So we like to get into we seem to have become addicted to these fights and these battles, and have completely lost focus on this subject of independent education and why it's important. So I think we need to keep that in mind and start to um, do two things. One, set up simple um, curriculum and learning plans to, I was just saying, study the history in a way where we become aware and enlightened. We're more aware and informed and enlightened nowadays, but at the same time, we're so distracted by other things. And so we have to become more focused, laser focused on uh, what needs to be done. And then on the other side, which is what Dr. Carruthers and I were talking about, we have to start to pull these resources together in the networks. You know, for example, the church networks, the mosque networks, the educator networks, the homeschool networks, which is something that that we were successful at doing at MUI, pulling together the homeschoolers who
Mhm.
were connected to us. And so the homeschool network is important because that's growing, especially post COVID. And so pooling these resources and networks together and really organizing um, a management structure to help these independent educators in independent schools, whether it's a home school or whether it's a church school or just a regular private school, that people in the community pull together and set up. And as you know, you don't really hear too much about that. There's not a lot of talk and energy around that anymore, setting up independent schools, um, because we stay engaged in this battle with the public school. And obviously, the public school is the public school. It's our school in a sense. Taxpayers pay to support the school. But to your point, we have some major problems, and the school system has just been inundated with so many other distracting things that we've never been get to the point where we could really um, focus these schools on what needs to be done, and the priority of um, why we have independent schools. To your point, when we go out and we see the behavior and we see the living is the way we live and the way we interact, the way we do business. These things are principles and pillars that can be strengthened in schools and in the community that surrounds schools, because schools create their own community. You know, so,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that's something that we really need to understand, how schools create their own community, and that community is what becomes the main educator, not so much the school, because everyone likes to debate about that, what the school should be teaching. But if you look at a model like Singapore, which is a very successful educational system, Singapore has a focus on civic education. And you don't hear anything about civic education in America. Every now and then you hear civics,
Mhm.
but you don't really hear anything about a focus on civic education as a part of the curriculum. So,
It's the way it's taught is just to pass a test. You know, they
right,
have to they have to pass a
right,
test, but the
right,
students don't really understand the origins of the information, the
Mhm.
functionality of the information, and again, their responsibility, to do something with it.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
when you have administrators who come in and try to address that, I mean, it's obvious, that they're under attack.
Right.
So this problem that we're having with education is
Hmm.
something that we really, really need to address, because it's
Yeah.
going to have an impact on, as you were saying, about how our people are going to respond, which is
Hmm.
one of the faults that I saw as when I was coming through school. And we that was during the civil rights period, and we got the money to go to school.
Right.
um, and but when you got out, there was no one there to say, okay, this is what we want you to do with this education. We're about building communities. It's like you
Hmm.
keep missing the mark. And then, like you said earlier, we get caught up in these battles. We're
Right.
constantly fighting. We're so busy fighting, we can't stop and do what we need to do.
Yeah, because like right now we're dealing with uh, this attack on, um, and there's a campaign to address the removal of black principals, particularly black male principals. And we know Brother Abdul Muhammad, who was removed from the school from Lindblom as the principal mid-year. Now, here's a teacher who was so effective at teaching
Mm-hmm.
that in a city that is notorious for dropouts,
Yes.
going all the way back to the 60s, a city that's notorious for dropouts, you have a teacher who um, was at a few different schools, but one in particular, CVS, where he was nominated Teacher of the Year years ago, where students would skip all of the other classes and come to his
And I
class.
can bear witness to that because I saw that.
Right,
Standing room,
right,
standing room only in his classroom.
right, right.
Yes.
And then sometimes would have students who weren't even supposed to be in the classroom coming into the classroom
That's right.
just to be taught.
That's right.
So that type of education and that type of environment, that shows you that the young people, the youth, were and are thirsty to have a quality education.
Right. That's right.
you know, so
And it
um,
begins with the fact that they're being taught, you know, our
right,
history. They're being taught
right, right,
truths of
right,
our history.
right,
They're being
right,
given information that they haven't heard before.
right. And then they felt a connection. For example, most of the schools that I've been in, because other than MUI, I've had the opportunity to work in charter schools and a couple of public schools and alternative schools, and I would always do a morning assembly, you know, because that was the opportunity to connect to the getting them to connect to school and to schooling and education is key because they feel disconnected. They feel disconnected. So when we have a teacher who becomes an administrator and who is a master teacher and a master at connecting our youth, and he's removed, that should tell us something.
That's right.
And the time and effort and resources, um, we need to immediately begin to reorganize what we're doing and reorganize our focus and start to take back our um, this education process for our young people because it's very serious. It's very serious right now. So to your point, we need to reach out, and that's what um, we're doing with Genius Education and Innovation Center. And also, I wanted to mention, which um, I established the organization Committee of Cleanliness, and as a nonprofit here in the city, because part of that education needs to be us taking responsibility for our community, which starts with keeping it clean,
Mhm.
and that's a re-education process. Because that young person that you mentioned who goes downtown and he feels more life, he sees more life, you know, and that starts with us taking responsibility when we can ride around our community, and this relates directly to education. When we can ride around our community and we can see, which we see every day, people just roll the window down and throw trash. That's
Absolutely.
that's that's just a level of destruction that,
Mhm.
you know, forget about all of the debates with white people and all of the forget about all the excuses. You have become your own worst enemy, and you become a victim, and that has to stop. And so the re-education process that we have to go through starts real simple, right there. Take charge of your community, take charge of your neighborhood, take charge of your education, clean up your community, keep your community clean, you know, because children have to walk to school in our community and walk by trash. That's unacceptable.
That's unacceptable.
And um, we have to stop it. And so we're constantly looking somewhere else to find blame as opposed to looking at ourselves.
And we go on through this battle right now. Well, it's in the home. Well, it's in the school. Well, it's the computers. It's the this. We constantly trying to put that finger on who is the culprit here. um but I like what you said about schools having communities within the schools.
Right.
And sometimes we, regardless of if there's some dysfunctionality going on in the home, the school can often be a haven for many of the children. Just like many children come to school every day because they're going to get two meals.
Right.
They're going to get a breakfast. It's not the best breakfast, but they're going to get a breakfast. They're going
Right.
to get a lunch, and if it's an after school program, they're going to get a dinner, and they're coming to school for a safe haven. And they're also, this is their opportunity to communicate with their peers and
Hmm.
begin to develop as a group. We put people into groups. We call them millennials, and we have these different names for the
Right.
baby boomers, and we have these names for these groups. And where do they first begin to culminate? In the schools.
Exactly.
You
Yeah.
know.
And that's what I always think about. Um, whatever I see out in the community, anywhere, any community,
Hmm.
I always think, at one point these people were in a school somewhere. They were in a classroom. Even with homelessness, I see people and I'm thinking, one day, once they were in a classroom. I think, well, I wonder what were they doing in kindergarten? You know,
Right.
what were they doing in elementary? What was their experience? And so yeah, we can change a lot. But those 2 points I mentioned, the two sides. One, really putting an emphasis back on what's being taught, how we're educating, um, and that's why I brought up the civic education,
Hmm.
because that's a country like Singapore focuses heavily on that, and they've been able to turn their society around. They focus on that as a foundation, but then they provide the math, science, technology, and what's needed to basically, and I don't know if people know this, Singapore is a city state island. Okay, city, state, country. I mean, it's a unique place.
Hmm.
Okay, and so at one point they were this small island that had no natural resources. Okay, and they found themselves in the 50s and 60s trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to compete in this global world, changing world? And education was the key for them. So they created what became one of the best educational systems in the world. And they have one of the highest qualities of life. They have one of the most educated populations. They're very high tech, very advanced, and this is an island city state that had no natural resources.
Hmm.
So they focus on their people as the main resource. That was their only resource, their people. So they knew they had to create a really high quality educational system in order to compete globally, and they've done that.
And we look at America, and people come here from other countries, more prepared to do perform these high tech jobs than people here in our own country. And then we are bringing immigrants over here now to take jobs, to work to because we need workers. So
Right,
the fact that we have invested in our people as a whole in this country educationally, is obvious that the investment has not been appropriate. And I know you were telling me earlier, we were having a conversation um, about one of the countries where the library is always packed.
right.
You know,
India.
in
Hmm.
India, okay,
Right,
and then you go to our libraries, and you can always just walk in.
right.
It's sparse.
It's the
And then
quietest
you look
place.
at how they dismantled the libraries in the
Hmm.
public schools. Some of them a lot. Some of them they turned into lunchrooms, or
Yeah,
whatever they needed it for, but they dismantled the libraries.
yeah.
So it's like there's an intentional dumbing down of the people here in America. And so that's why I think you have so many parents that have gone to homeschooling their children.
Hmm.
And then many of the other cultures that have come here to America are starting their own schools. The Chinese, they want their own schools. The Hispanics, they want their own schools. You see the French school, and the Ukrainian schools, and the Jewish schools, and
Hmm.
everybody are developing their own schools because
Right,
they understand the need to try to maintain a culture, and to educate people who will be able to sustain them.
right, right. Yeah, and that's a good point. It goes back to we mentioned about civic education, and I was looking at one of the basic definitions that they have, which is very basic, but it talks about making sure that all citizens learn about their rights and responsibilities and how these are accessed and exercised. But I like to focus on the word responsibilities,
Mhm.
because when we approach education and there's a focus on, and that goes back to that Singapore model. If they're focusing on educating everyone to understand their responsibilities as a part of the society, okay, and how they have to take responsibility for themselves, their community, their society. And when that's a focus and that's a conversation, and then you have programs and activities built around that. Because if you think about the amount of money we've spent on different programming and activities, but it should always focus back on the student and the individual being responsible for themselves and their community and their surroundings,
That's right.
and participating in improving themselves, improving the community around, and it just changes the atmosphere. It changes, it connects everyone, it keeps them connected. You know, so like when you talk about when you go out and we see the youth and we look on the news, and they're terrorizing stores downtown. There's no connection there. They've completely lost connection with having any responsibility.
And those people that we have that are our leadership, our politicians,
Hmm.
where's their responsibility?
Right,
You know,
right.
when people get an education and they're able to get a good job, where's their responsibility? Even to the teachers in the schools.
Right.
You have a job, but you have a responsibility to teach these children, so these children can pass on. You're passing on a baton. That's how you should be thinking.
Hmm. Right.
So what would you say would be the components of a good school?
Well, um, that's an interesting question, because in talking about the components, I think right now we have to adjust that a little bit, surprisingly, because we're it sounds strange in 2023 that I would say this, but we actually have to keep in mind that we're going to have to actually rebuild. We have to actually re-educate. That's another thing that we did focus on, that MUI and the nation, with the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. There was always a focus on re-education and retraining. So when we say re-education and retraining, why are we saying re-education and retraining? Well, because, as Carter G. Woodson, pointed out, there's been a miseducation, which was the whole purpose of Black history and Black studies. So there's been a miseducation, misinformation. If you go back into Booker T. Washington's writings and his work, um, he addressed that on a broader scale, because it wasn't just Black people, but in America, there's been a miseducation of everyone.
Hmm.
Okay, and and there also has always been in America this disconnect from um, from work. Booker T addressed that. There's always been this disconnection between the individual, Black or white. And of course, for us, we were much more industrious coming out of slavery. But there's always been a disconnection in this country between the individual and work. So when we go back and talk about responsibility, you know, components of a good education and good schooling has to include the responsibility and the importance of work, and how that relates to production and being productive. So that's one component. Obviously, um, we always hear safe and clean environments, and even that has to be taken to another level, because we know safety. We know how that's looking right now in America. Um, but cleanliness is also going back to taking responsibility, you know, and taking responsibility for the community. And so that's another important component that may have not have necessarily been a focus before, not across the board, but it needs to be a focus now. We have a city where they can build new highways and new construction, and then the next day you have young people tagging it and putting
Hmm.
graffiti on it. They have no responsibility for their environment. You know, if you go out and you spray paint public places, that's not your property. you have been completely disconnected from that
Mhm.
society.
Mhm.
And so that's another sign that we can um, look at, you
And
know.
when you see someone doing something, they are always communicating something.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
just like with a baby or a young toddler, uh, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. If you give them a toy, if you give them an object, what they do with it gives some sign of their intelligence and their awareness. Are they going to take it and play with it, figure out how it works, or they're gonna throw it on the floor or stick it in their mouth,
Right.
chew on it. It's like, okay, somebody has given you've gone out and bought some spray paint to do
Hmm.
what? To
Right.
destroy. I mean, that's how we're acting, and because it's like you don't know what to do with your time, you don't know what to do with your energy, you don't know what to
Yeah.
do with the knowledge that you have. And then communication and language,
Yeah.
the way they
Absolutely.
dummy down the schools, and not teaching language and a formal way of communicating with each other.
Hmm.
When there's limited communication, everything goes from A to Z. I think that's why we have so much violence.
Yeah. No, no. You hit it on the head. That actually needs to be made number one, priority number one.
Hmm.
um, in those elements dealing with civic education, taking responsibility, um, getting a better, stronger foundation of history and how it connects. But the communication piece is huge,
Hmm.
you know, and that is at the root of um, the problem, you know. And going back to the graffiti, it's communicating, like you said, it's communicating something. And so communication, being able to communicate, being taught how to communicate, and then the schools and the community and society keeping the communication lines open for young people,
Hmm.
you know, to really build from that and learn from one another and lift people up, as opposed to shutting people down and shutting them out using communication. So that's a key component of that new approach, in the re-education and retraining, putting communication as a vital part, and teaching it. That's a huge part.
So when you talk about communication, you're talking about values, and you're talking about understanding, our different forms of government, uh, uh, our traditions, our social organizations. This is all culture. You know,
Yeah.
we're
Yes.
lacking, as I've heard some commentators on some of our local radio stations say. We're lacking um, capital, culture capital. We're
Yes. Yeah.
we're lacking that.
Yeah. But I want to stress this part, because when we create that new culture, again using Singapore as a model, what did they do to become successful? They address that culture and those components,
Hmm.
and then they focus on teaching the skills that need to be taught to put their culture and their community on top.
Hmm.
So they brought in those um, math and science skills.
Hmm.
So Booker T. Washington established Tuskegee Institute. Culture was key. Civics, you know, communication and
Hmm.
connecting the community.
It's a part of.
But when they connected on rebuilding and building. They connected on building Tuskegee. So the students were a part of building Tuskegee. When he brought George Washington Carver and the students built those labs and those school buildings and hospitals. So I've mentioned that because we have a we tend to um, discuss these things and start to address it, and then you'll find our schools completely focused on that. But we have to remember the purpose of why we're there in
That's right.
school is
That's
to
right.
prepare them for the future and to build civilization. So we we have to create this culture in this community, but we're doing it to move things along and provide the proper education for them. That's why we at the Genius Education Center, we focus on bringing in STEM, STEAM, robotics, um, coding, etc. Because we want to do this, we want to have this strong cultural, tight knit community, but we want to get on to the business of educating and preparing them to be productive citizens, as opposed to going down to the South Loop and looking for a store to loot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, this is a destructive civilization that we live in. This is, there's absolutely no way right now, if we looked around the world, and they used to brag about America being the model, but you know,
No.
of decay. Just have to be honest. So I'm having streaming issues for
Okay.
some reason, but we're up on that time
Well,
anyway.
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you fine. You're running out of time. Okay. Well,
Yes,
would you give a closing remark here in regards to um, giving credence to having our own schools?
yes. Just we have to just take action, support our schools and our good schools and our good teachers and administrators and principals. Um, support them and back them, but at the same time, uh, seek out those like you. I email for people who want to be involved in creating independent education. Info at unlockthegenius.com. Um, we'll be providing more information on the Committee of Cleanliness and how we want to get the community involved in taking responsibility and taking charge of our community and cleaning it up. That has to be first. We have to clean. We can't, children going to the downtown and north side, they go and see these beautiful neighborhoods, and then they come, they get on the south side, and it's trash. That has to stop. And before we say anything else and ask for anything else, we need to start cleaning up our neighborhoods, and taking responsibility. So that's where I am. Take responsibility, clean up the neighborhood, and then let's start to network and organize to support the creation of small schools, whether it's in a church or a mosque or a home, or a community center, whatever it is. And so that's when you building that conversation.
Absolutely. We can begin to
Okay.
develop a consortium of independent schools here in America, especially here in Chicago. All right. So, Mr. Muhammad, Dr. Muhammad, your screen has frozen here. Let's see what I'm going to do. So, I want to thank you for coming. And I know you said you had to leave, but thank you for coming tonight.
Right.
Uh, Friends and family,
Absolutely.
that was Dr. Larry Muhammad of
Absolutely.
Genius Education Innovation Center, located at
So hopefully you
1619 East 67th Street. We have been talking about the importance of starting our own schools. There are many educators out there who have retired. Many of you have worked at the administrative level. And then there are many of our Black teachers who lost their jobs. It's time for us to roll up our sleeves and put the knowledge that we have to work to save our children, to save our communities. And those of you that have had the opportunity to be successful in this society, in the Black community, you have a responsibility to give back. And that is what Dr. Muhammad was saying in his words today. There's a responsibility that we all have. And there are a number of schools, independent Black schools here in the Chicago area. I just mentioned Genius Education Innovation Center. There's the Cambridge Classical Academy at 4860 South Dearborn, Village Leadership Academy at 800 South Wales, Freedom Home Academy at 9501 South Dorchester, Betty Shabazz Academy, 7823 South Ellis, Barbara Sizemore Academy at 6547 South Stewart. And as Dr. Muhammad mentioned, he was a student through the Nation of Islam, was another independent school. And these are people who have come together and started working with our children. There are over 400 Black schools across the nation, and we need more in here in Chicago. It's about education. It's about what we're teaching our young and our old. And it's about what we do with the education that we have. And so this is why we are definitely proponents of our Black schools. And so we're coming up close to the end of the hour. I do want to state again, as you know, Repair, Restore, and Grow Black Communities, we're a nonprofit foundation, and we've been working to enhance the awareness and support of our Black businesses. But as we put people into these businesses, we need people who have a good education, who have a sense of culture, who have a sense of values, who know how to communicate, who understand and know our history. This is very important. And so this is why we started this organization. And this is why we take the time to bring these businesses to you every night. But we need our business owners to be people who have a sense of responsibility to the community, to the people that they serve. We need our politicians to have a sense of responsibility to the people, to the communities that they serve, and especially the Black community. There's so much pushback when we elevate ourselves. This is an experience that we are continuing to have in this country, and it's not the experience that other ethnic groups are having. So this is the hand that we're being dealt, and we have to stop trying to act like that the problem of racism, the cloak of racism, is not there, and we can't wish it away. We have to begin to stop and look at what we're doing as a people. We here at Repair, Restore, and Grow Black Community, as we talk about education, are great proponents of our bookstores. We once had 22 Black bookstores here in Chicago, and we were down to 2. But as I continue to tell you, every Wednesday we have a resurgence. And you can go to rrgbc.org, and all of the bookstores here in Chicago are listed on our website. And we feature a Black bookstore on our website every month. For July, it was Afriware Bookstore, located at 1701 East First Avenue. And you can go to afriwarebooks.com and purchase to support Afriware. We had a book giveaway, and every month we give a book away. And that's because reading and knowledge is very important. The book that we gave away was Journey of My Soul. This is the book, and the author is our very own Greg Brown, who is the president and CEO of the Southside Community Federal Credit Union. Here we have a compilation of beautiful and insightful poetry that Greg has written. And the winner of that book is Anthony Ladson of Chicago. So Anthony, we will be contacting you, and you will get a copy of this book free of charge at our expense. And so we want to thank Afriware Bookstore for being our featured bookstore of the month. Now we're in the month of August. And so our bookstore for the month of August is Rose Cafe. Rose, the young lady that started that bookstore, lives in the Roseland area. And her bookstore is online, so you have to go to rosecafe.org. And she has a wonderful litany of books that she can offer for children and adults on her website. Our books, the book that we have chosen for the book of the month for August is The Three Mothers. Now, this is a book by Anna Malika Tubbs, and it's how the mothers of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, James Baldwin shaped a nation. While entrenched in racism, they instilled resistance and that we have value in their sons. And look what great people they grew up to be. Look how they gave back. And Martin Luther King and Malcolm X ultimately gave their lives and they fought against racism in this country. And so we ask that you support our bookstores. They have wonderful books. Some of our bookstores can help you acquire rare finds, and some of our bookstores are engaged in publishing. And so go to our Black bookstores. I know the first thing that we do when we buy books is go to Amazon. Well, we have a wonderful group of bookstores, Black bookstores here in the Chicago area that you can support. And I mentioned earlier Greg Brown and the Southside Community Federal Credit Union. They have been here in Chicago for over 20 years, supporting the Black community, giving loans, giving financial support to people who weren't able to go to many of our larger banks. They offer financial literacy classes on Saturdays. The Southside Community Federal Credit Union is located in the mall at 55th and Wentworth. That's right at Garfield and the Eisenhower Expressway. In order for the Southside Community Federal Credit Union to thrive, they need you, they need us to open up accounts, create accounts. That's how a bank generates its funds. So please support the Southside Community Federal Credit Union. How do you become a winner for our book giveaway? Go to rrgbc.org and subscribe. Go to our website and you can watch all of our podcasts for the many businesses that we have interviewed here in the Chicago area. Also on our website, as I stated earlier, you will see the list of our books, any important events, and you can also subscribe. And once you subscribe, you become eligible to be a part of our book giveaway. So we have work to do. But most of all, if I would like to leave, the most important is our responsibility. We all have a level of responsibility. Not pointing the finger, not saying whose fault it is. We all just have to roll up our sleeves and get to work. If the boat is sinking, there's no need in sitting there arguing and pointing. Everybody get in there and do what you can, and everyone can do something. And you teachers out there, and you administrators out there, and you people who know how to start a business, think about really seriously beginning to develop our own schools. We have to educate our children, and we need to be educating ourselves so that we are better at giving back. That's what's important. And most of all, please support a Black business. And thank you for coming tonight.